Well, welcome back to a new episode of the Win More, Live Better podcast. Now, today's guest is going to be, I think, an extra special one, not only because of her, I think, rich coaching background that we're going to get into over the course of our conversation, but also what really brought us together last year when we met for the first time was how much synergy we both had in not only the work that we're now stepping into or doing, but also I think some of the values and things that are most important that underlie that work and how much care she has for the coaching profession and serving coaches. And so I was just really excited and honored that Tracy Slusser was willing to spend some time with us today and having this conversation as the next guest on the show. So, Tracy, without further ado, I just want to thank you for taking some time to have the conversation.
Oh, thank you, Brandon. Your work has drawn me in and definitely spoken exactly to what I'm doing, and have felt the support and the connection there for sure.
Yeah, I think within this, I think there's an opportunity for again to kind of peel back a bit of the layer of the work that you're doing now, but also obviously some of the past experiences and history that have probably shaped a lot of that to
Mhm.
lead you to now. So I think it would be helpful in a way to start there. Now, some that have followed the show maybe have heard me express this sentiment. I someone shared it with me over the last year or so, and it's kind of resonated on a personal level that all of us are most powerfully positioned to serve the person that we once were. Now, that can come in the form of a role and a job title, and that can also come in the form of, what maybe someone has gone through, different emotions that they've managed or different things that they've overcome and so on. So I think before we get into the work that you're currently doing, I want to know about Tracy, like who this version of Tracy was that in essence, now that you are serving, like tell us a little bit about the coach version of you, what she was like, what was important to her, and just a little bit of that journey that you've had in coaching.
Yeah, I mean, we're all reflections of our experience, and um, I had some pretty incredible ones as a college coach, and got to a point in my career where I was looking around and like, where do we go for support? It was 2019. My head coach, Greg Meehan at Stanford, had just been named the head Olympic coach. And it was like we were coaching some of the top athletes in the world, pressure of medal production, all of this started to kind of come together. And before that, it didn't feel like pressure. I was just coaching people. This was great. But then all of a sudden, you add this other element of outside expectations. And I looked up and I was like, where do I go if I'm having feelings of imposter syndrome and feelings of self doubt and wanting to continue to kind of grow and develop myself so that I could then show up for Greg in that position, as well as the Stanford team and our potential Olympians. And so I looked around and was like, I went and actually sat down with our SWA. I sat down with our sports psych at Stanford and was like, what do we do as coaches when we're feeling like we could use some support? There's this next level that I can see that we've stepped into as a staff, and like I want the skills to do that. And they kind of looked at me like, I don't know, you know what I mean? Like they're equipped to support athletes in this way. Um, so yeah, I was just looking anywhere I could to how can I continue to develop? How can I just get to know the self, the insecurities within myself, and be a better version of myself for the people I want to serve in this role? And that's when I kind of looked into executive leadership coaching and hired myself a coach. Um, so that's kind of how it all started back in 2019, was those feelings of self-doubt, those feelings of imposter syndrome. And at that point we had won two national championships. We had in 2016 medalists, like we had done the things, top recruiting classes, all these things. And I was still like, okay, who am I? Where am I? Um, and so that's what really led me to find this outside support for myself.
Your story and example, I think, illustrates this like common thing for some, and that like everything's kind of quote unquote working on paper, or again, the resume continues to kind of look better and better with the success, on the court, in the pool, and on the field and so on in our coaching careers. But on the inside, it doesn't always match, right? There's something that maybe is invisible or more private that people don't get to see. I don't know for you if there was a maybe a tipping point moment or if you felt like it was more of a gradual build per se, but when you started to first become more aware of those insecurities, some of those emotions that you were feeling, those pressures, when did you start to notice that something was a little bit off, or then it did kind of point you towards like asking for help?
It was interesting, and this is a great question because it's bringing me back to that time. And I felt in my family life like I love so fiercely that like I'm okay to screw up and I'll figure it out. And I remember feeling that feeling of that, not being afraid to make mistakes because I knew and I trusted I would figure it out. I wanted to feel that in my career. I wanted to feel, because a lot of it is the same. It's service based. We're serving athletes. We're with people in the day to day. I was always aligned with the human side of what we were doing coaching wise. Um, but I had this fear of screwing it up all the time. And I was like, I wonder what it would be like to really dig into what that fear is. Um, and just be able to be like, ugh, what if I could feel this feeling of just trusting myself, trusting my experience, trusting that I'd figure it out. And that contrast of what I was feeling at home with my family and what my goal was in professionally was like, let me go investigate this. Let me learn more about myself and what that's about, so that I can like truly show up without that extra weight on.
It's such a like a powerful frame to come from to like, hey, I'm gonna look in the mirror first and ask myself, where is it for me that either, I have room for improvement, I have room for growth, but also, again, what are those things, if I'm being really honest, not just to look in the mirror, but then to be honest about what's seen and
Mhm.
what's felt, that's not necessarily for many of us a comfort space or a space that we're always willing to go. So I think it speaks to that vulnerability and that courage that you had to kind of not just to wrestle with these things, but to kind of honor them by giving them, the respect and to acknowledge them. So I think that's really interesting. Where the one thing I wanted to kind of peel back, I remember reading, you had a really great message that you shared, I think it was last year, 2 years ago on LinkedIn about kind of this like identity trap that
Mhm.
coaches fall into. Now, I know there may be other traps that maybe were at play at times in your career, but I'm interested, given that what you talked about, like, hey, we're winning on paper or we're winning in championships and things like that, but that trap that comes with it for us. Could you talk a little bit more about that, what that experience was like as you were coaching and how that also then tied into what you were feeling?
Yeah, the identity trap of winning is my identity, performance is my identity. Um, wow, we give a lot in that moment outside of ourselves and outside of our control when we do that. And that is scary, right? When whether I am a good person or whether I am good at my job or whether I am worthy of respect is if I'm winning or not. Uh, that just did not, that felt uncomfortable. And I was like, this discomfort is something I need to investigate. And so a lot of that work was about separating this is what I do, this is not who I am. And I think that, and I see this in clients that I coach, like because this profession is so wholehearted and you're connecting with athletes and it's human centric, it's really hard sometimes to separate that. But finding that place for yourself of like, this is where I begin, this is where, you know what I mean, the work starts, and finding that boundary was really important. And something once I had it, I couldn't unlearn it. Once I kind of was able to do the work in myself and understand where the fears were coming from and understand that actually I had a lot of the answers already inside of me. Um, that was my foundation. And then no matter what room I walked in, it was like, okay, I can handle this. This isn't going to penetrate to the who I am. This is just what I do, and I can change what I do. I can learn. I can be creative. I can adjust. Um, but there was a layer of like this is not who I am as a person. And that was really freeing for me, when I could kind of set that boundary for myself.
I'm really glad you actually just used that word freeing because as I was listening, when you go back to your last response about what you felt at home versus in coaching, right? Like what I heard in essence you describe in the home life was more freedom, like more like, hey, less, more grace, more distance just from like acceptance of like, yes, I'm gonna be imperfect and that's okay. Whereas in coaching, sometimes, again, it comes from such good intentions because we want to serve, we want to help. It's why we all oftentimes get into the profession. And yet we know for players that they generally compete best from a space of freedom. And yet, how many of us as coaches are coaching from a space of freedom? And so to hear you kind of say, like, hey, distancing yourself from the results and the outcomes as one of those ways to create freedom, to me, it just makes a lot of sense. And so I love that sentiment.
I just started like it's data, you know, and as soon as I separated it from this swim is a reflection of how good I am as a coach in this moment. Every time someone got behind the blocks was my worthiness was on the line versus, all right, this is data. I am smart enough to figure this out. We can make adjustments. This isn't a reflection of who I am as a person or whether or not I work hard. We're doing the best we can with the information we have. Once I get more information, we will make different decisions. And that's kind of a different approach that I had.
Whether this was a product of working with the coach and starting to examine some of those things or just other things that you were learning, like I think one thing I'm hearing you kind of describe is like it did start to expand your perspective. Like you started to have again a more gracious perspective towards yourself. When you talk about maybe starting to get to a place where maybe you were coaching more freely, what were those big things that you felt like what started to look different or sound different, whether it was external or even internal for you, that might have indicated, okay, you were coaching with more freedom at that time?
It's funny because it goes back to just little things and more about like and this is something I that resonates. We have to lead ourselves before we can lead others. And small areas of allowing myself to be human. I dropped the car keys on my way to the car. What do I say to myself in that moment? Right? Do I beat myself up or I'm like, oh, you silly human, look at you, you know, and move on with my day? And those I realized in kind of making this awareness around this is a little bit of perfectionism, but of just creating more pockets of compassion for myself. All of a sudden, I had so much more grace and compassion for my athletes. And
Mhm.
so, and that to me was, and in my family life as well. Um, but being able to practice that for myself and giving myself the freedom to be human allowed me then to create that environment for my athletes, that I was coaching. And I knew it wasn't about perfection. At the same time, because I wasn't allowing myself to be human, there was a piece of me that wasn't allowing them to be human too. And I think that opened things up for me and for the people that I was working with.
I love the twofold nature of that, to now bring this back to like, okay, yeah, how does that then impact ultimately this environment that you're creating for those that you lead? And as we know, like so much of the environment is going to be shaped by the leaders, values and their principles and how they're showing up day to day. And again, if they're coming from a place of fear, if they're coming from a place of judgment, if they're coming from a place of lack of self-compassion and so on, those things certainly trickle into the environment. What were some of those, if you were to kind of, I don't know if this was something you ever distilled down concretely or you just inherently knew, but like when you think back as a coach, your core principles, those values that you felt like you really wanted to instill and have shaped the environment for those you were leading and serving, what were those for you?
Definitely the idea that this was their swimming, their experience. And so that ownership and accountability, I wanted to really foster that for them. When they succeeded, that was their success. when they, fell short, they, you know what I mean? We worked as a team to figure it out. So definitely really instilling that in them in a practice environment and giving them the tools to be able to see that they had what they needed inside of them, was really important. So that ownership and self-awareness was huge. Um, worth ethic at this level, it's almost a given. In fact, when I was at Stanford, the idea of having to keep an eye on them to pull them back was more of the role of us as coaches, we realized, because these were kids that and women that I was working with that like were super hungry. Um, and then gratitude was something that we encouraged and worked into the value system every single day. Gratitude for being a part of the team, gratitude for being in this experience, gratitude for being able to um, hone their craft. And so these were things that we actively talked about and made space for um, throughout throughout my coaching.
I'm gonna, I didn't plan on asking this, but when you bring up those athletes that you mentioned, particularly at Stanford, that profile of the, extremely hardworking, high standards, um, I've had a few athletes from Stanford that I've worked with, and I very much have seen that, and I've seen the trap maybe isn't is a little bit of a strong word, but at the same time, it's that relentless work ethic to like figure it out. And again, because you hold yourself to such high standards, both professionally, personally, and all these different aspects of your life, eventually, though, that can have a cost to it. And so I'm interested actually for a moment if you were to maybe talk through what you noticed about some of the players and like how you help them, but also too, like how, if at all, do you now see that with even coaches? Like, because I think there is that
Yeah.
that trap, if you will, that can show up in coaching as well.
Well, it's the paradox of grit and compassion, right?
Mm.
When you kind of identify as like, I work harder than everybody else, I'm going to do all the things all the time, and then realize that gets you so far. But then once you're at the top, sometimes being a little compassionate for yourself can actually springboard you beyond. And working with these athletes and honestly, even kind of unwiring some of this in my own space, um, is that rest and doing less can actually be the thing that gets you to move forward. Having a kid have an athlete go, 10 repeats and they, hit their pace time on 9 out of 10, and they're walking out thinking about the one. How do we get them to really think about the nine and have compassion for the one and still have the goal to have all 10 where they want it, but not let that one discredit the nine that they did. Um, and so it's just being on the journey, understanding how they're wired, being compassionate for that mentality, because it has gotten to them to where they are, right, and it's served them. And so it's not something we want to like completely disassemble or tell them it's wrong, because it's not. At the same time, when you get to a certain level, you have to realize like what got me here may not mean what takes me to the next level. And working with them, and we had a wonderful athlete, Maya Dorada, who had this incredible balance, and she was a 2016 gold medalist, and super into academics, super into athletics, same as most Stanford student athletes. But she had this approach to swimming that was just like, find the win every day, find the win. It doesn't mean I'm ignoring where I want to be better. Just I know for me, in order to keep doing this and to be consistent and to really stand tall at the end, like I need to find the win every day. And I remember she came in and talked to our team before an NCAA championships one year and just kind of resonated that message. And it just like, it hit with every single one of them, myself included, of just trying to find the win every day.
Mm. I love that it ties even into your gratitude, right? Like for value in just terms of like how it is such a default for so many of us to immediately jump to the gap, immediately jump to what needs to get better or where we're maybe falling short. And especially again when you have high standards, high aspirations, a lot of ambition, which, most of these athletes that we're working with at the highest level, same with coaches, like they have that as well, but it does tint our lens. And I really liked how you said it serves you to a point, and then being coming aware of at what at what point does it start to tip in a favor where now it's actually more costly, it's more expensive to you in a negative way, to me is really important in terms of, those tipping points. Like for you, when you reached the point in your coaching journey where it was time where I don't know what those months were leading up to that decision to step away. Maybe we could, peel back what was going on for you internally or externally there. But also, I'm interested to know kind of as you stepped away, what was the hardest thing for you to kind of let go of to then transition into this new direction?
It was years of getting to this place to make this decision to step away from coaching. Um, it's I had always had this incredible relationship with sport, and at the essence, sport was the avenue in which I got to have an impact on the lives of young people. Um, and that was my why every single day. Swimming was the avenue in which I got to have an impact. And the thought of who's coaching the coaches, once I was kind of in it and realized like, oh my gosh, we're having an impact as a coach, whether we're intentional about it or not. And so when I got in it and I was like, wow, what if we had the support to be the best version of ourselves? What kind of impact could we have? How much more intentional could we be on the young people that we're working with? And I don't think anyone's more influential on our youth than parents, our coaches. I felt it myself. I grew up in sport. Sport was where I found my confidence. So I have this like love letter with sport. And once I kind of was looking around at my peers and friends and colleagues in this space, I was like, what would it look like to truly support them? How much more impact could we have? How much more intentional could we be? I don't think any coach wakes up and was like, I want to inflict harm on an athlete. That doesn't happen, right? Like this is a profession that is built from passion and taking really good care of people. And so I got this like, who's coaching the coaches, and it kind of rattled around for about 6 years. Um, since I did my own work, I was like, okay, wow, this feels really good. Like I'm living this. I'm experiencing this from before and after, and could see the contrast. And the next step for me was to become a head coach. And I had talked about that with Greg and talked about that with my husband, and kind of looked around and was like, but what does support look like? What could it look like? Um, and so I talk about courage because, like, once I had the thought, I couldn't unthink it. I was like, why not me? Why not me step into this gap of support? Um, what if I could create what I wished I would have had, as I was coming through the ranks. And so I had this feeling of like, if I can have impact on one coach, and then that one coach can go ahead and have impact on the team, the impact is exponential. And it took me a while. It took me a while to get there. It was the scariest thing I've ever done. I say courage, like, right? It's a word that looks like really cute on a coffee mug, but actually being in that space where your toes are on the edge and you're ready to jump, it was the gnarliest experience I've ever had in my life. Um, so yeah, it was all driven by impact and the thought of what if I could fill a gap for people that I think are some of the most selfless and value driven leaders out there.
In a moment, I want to come back to this idea of, now with those that you're serving and helping as coaches, what they're coming to you with, what you're seeing and so forth. But I actually do want to pause for a moment on the courage piece, because one of my, I think a core principle of like the inner game of leadership, or what it means to lead yourself, to me is courage. I do think that that's one of those cardinal ones. So I love that that's something you shared. And I'd actually want to highlight it for a moment and hear you describe a little bit more like what kind of courage did it really take to step away from something that you're great at too, like something that has been your life? Because I'll just share this, like I've had some conversations even just in the last year with coaches who you can tell they're kind of trending to this fork in the road where they're like they know what they're doing isn't sustainable, or they know that there might be another way, but that fear of taking the risk, the fear of stepping into something unknown, like that isn't something that is easy for anyone. And so I would actually just love to hear you describe a little bit more kind of what you felt like, what kind of that courage looked like, was needed and required to step away from something. So again, something that you're great at.
I I was the classic gather more information. I read books and research, and is this real? Is what I'm, thinking a real life thing? Having conversations. I did this incredible program, and honestly, this was probably the tipping point for me at Stanford Graduate School of Business, the program in executive women's leadership, and applied to the program. 40 women from all over the world, top of their field. I may have been one of the first ever in the field of athletics to jump in. So they probably saw my application, was like, oh, sure. Um, but when I sat in that room and the professors in the space talking about the real life, and this was backed by research, I was and talking with people in industries that I knew nothing about, and yet we had so much in common. I was like, this is human work. Like, this is what this is. What if we treated coaches like leaders, like actual leaders who are out there in the business world? What does support look like? And once, I mean, I had that idea, but then once I had this experience of gathering information and being surrounded by people who were the top of their field and living this, I was like, this is it. I have to jump. This is where I'm at. I'd never been in an academic environment. Sport was my thing. School was there, but like I was an athlete. But in this environment at Stanford, and in that program, I was literally on the edge of my seat, just learning and soaking this all up. And I was like, this is it. This is, you can't ignore when you feel something so passionately. Um, and it was my next, it just kind of felt like this next chapter of impact. It was, of my love story with sport, this was the next step. Um, I had the incredible support of my husband every step of the way. Like, I can't, that has been foundational, from coaching and traveling. And he was home with our babies to um, giving him this idea. And he believed before I believed. He was like, yeah, you've got this. Like, and I was like, are you sure? Like, I know, like, you're biased. Um, and even now, like, I have moments and days where I'm like, what am I doing? And he's always been such a huge support. So I can't deny that that was a huge pillar in me feeling like I could take that leap and just dive headfirst into courage and just go for it.
Support is obviously instrumental for all of us. And anytime you take a risk and you bet on yourself, it's something that we talk about with athletes at times, and yet how that can be, because our focus is so much on them, how difficult that can be for us as leaders to do. I also do recognize, I think I've had similar conversations with athletes where when you have those that have maybe a more difficult time in that transition out of sport, it is oftentimes because they have yet to find that thing that will, I don't know if replace it is quite the right word per se, but what is that new thing that is energizing them,
Mhm.
is exciting them? And like for you to find that, and like you said, I never been into necessarily school was never priority one, but now I was in this environment and I loved every second. That to me is like, how do you help others find that is certainly goes hand in hand with it. Um, so let's talk for a bit now about like your work now, because again, that's kind of I think what brought us together, and it was just so fun to like hear your perspective and what you're seeing and noticing with coaches in this landscape. Some of that probably is certainly parallel to what you experience during your traditional sport coaching time, and also I know things continue to evolve very quickly in the coaching profession. So with coaches that you're working with or that come to you, what are some of the biggest things that they're coming to you saying, I could really use, some help with this, or these are the things that are maybe keeping me up or my pain points and so on. What are those big things that they're coming to you for often?
Um, some of them are honestly their relationship with the profession, just at the core of like, is this something I want to do? Um, Confidence in general and how it waxes and wanes throughout a season, throughout months. Um, how to work with, support, stand near somebody who maybe is not on the same value system, and what does that look and feel like in real time? Um, Self doubt, hard conversations. Um, yeah, just how can I be a better version of myself in this environment? How can I make this more sustainable? Um, how do I find the joy again? Like just anything that comes up um, are topics that come in to the space.
I don't know if this is the language that you would use, but I think one thing that's always interesting is like there are the things that people initially say, hey, these are the things that are my challenges, the things that are keeping me up at night, the things that are creating friction for me. And then as you do the work and as you do some of the things that you described, where you
Mhm.
like start looking in the mirror, you examining your patterns, your beliefs, and so on, it's like you may just start to discover that there are underlying causes that are actually driving some of those things. And some of those things are, you can call them inner blocks that are kind of running in the background of our lives. So peeling back the layer for a moment for you, what are some of those maybe inner blocks that you feel like over the course of your coaching sessions with someone, you're helping them shine a spotlight on and
Yeah.
you're helping them maybe develop more awareness around?
Yeah, I have the visual, and we've all seen it, the iceberg, right? Like everyone can see what's on top, but reality is like what's underneath. And um, sometimes when we come in and we think it's this thing that's right in front of us, it's maybe it's an inner critic voice inside of us. And how are we really talking to ourselves? Is this a story that's actually happening, or is this an inner dialogue that's supporting something that's not really there? Getting really honest about that. People's lived experience comes in all the time to all of us. We can't undo that, right? Um, some of the things I even experience, self doubt, and that's where I'm, self managing and just staying curious a lot with my clients. Is they are all reflections of their own very unique experience and bring different gifts to the table. And so when something outside of them is impacting that on a consistent basis, it's like where we usually go back to values. And that's kind of where I start with everybody. And a lot of times we can tell when our values being challenged because we can feel the crunchiness of it. We can feel um, the difficulty, um, but we can't name the value that it's crunching up against. And so that's kind of where I lay the foundation with the work that I do. Is let's get really clear on what's most important to you. Let's lay that foundation. So when things come up from an external standpoint and you feel that instant heat of like, okay, all right, this is pushing up against my value of compassion, or this is pushing up against my value of, integrity. Like, how can I sit with that for a second and understand that before I then go react? Um, and so really it comes down to kind of really value based leadership is what I focus in on. And that's usually when people come in with stuff, it's pressing up against something that's really important to them.
One of my favorite sentiments around the values is it's a reminder that when you encounter stress in your life, it's generally because one of those values is being threatened, it's being challenged, or you're having a difficult time maybe protecting it and so forth. So I love the idea of like, let's just get first clarity around what those values are for you so you do have a good foundation. Because then it also, then along the way, one of the perspective shifts is just a reminder that like, hey, when you're stressed, it often just means you're engaged with something that's important to you,
Yeah.
right? And when you flip it from that perspective, it's like, oh, okay, like it's not, we have all these negative connotations about how toxic stress is. and it certainly can be. And we also know our perspective towards it really matters as well. So I love that as a starting point. If I'm a coach listening to this, and this is, I'll do a quick little tie back here. In the first episode of this new season, I interviewed Jack Mulaney. He's a head running coach for the Hoka Northern Arizona Elite Professional Running Group, and he shared about, like, when I asked him, like, hey, if I were to shadow you for a month, what would it look like? And he jumped to values. I was like, oh, this is the next level. Like, the fact that you, even before we went to roles or tasks, you started with what's important to you and how those come to life. So if he had a clear grasp of, hey, these are my values, and these are how I'm bringing them to life and why they're important to me. If there's a coach out there that maybe hasn't quite defined those yet, or isn't maybe clear on how to then allow those values to guide them, what are some of the recommendations that you think it would be helpful for them to start with to do so?
To have a conversation when you're in a clear-headed space. I think trying to do this work when we are ignited and the house is on fire is really difficult. And so being proactive to say, okay, from a calm place, what is most important to me? What do I want my legacy to work look like? So almost this reverse engineer aspect of it, of like when I am, there's a visualization of like when you're at your retirement party and you're seeing people come up to the podium. What do they say? What is the sentiment? What is the impact you had? And that kind of starts to bring to light, like, okay, these are the things that are most important to me. This is where my values grow from. And what are my actions that are aligned with that? And so if you're a coach, if you can take that pause, and that's not easy, right? You're in the middle of a season, maybe that's not the time. Um, but if you can really lay that foundation from a grounded place of understanding what impact you want to have, what legacy you want to have, um, and then be able to have the support and the accountability throughout the season as things get hot and things pull you away and things press up against that, to say, okay, here's my foundation, here's what I'm coming back to. And that's why I started this, because I think it's wonderful to go to your coaching conferences and to different organizations for the week, seminars, and you get to network and you get to learn and develop for that one week. And I encourage that, absolutely. And what are you doing on the day to day? Who's helping you stay in this place on the day to day? Because there's everything pulling you up to react in a high pressure environment. And especially in our new environment, especially in the NCAA, where everything is kind of flipped on its head and coaches are still trying to find, how can I still have these same values in this new system? Um, so that's what I would say, is just that consistency of getting clear on what you're really all about, and then making sure you have really good people to help you stay and honestly be honest with you about, hey, I noticed this tendency. Where are you at on your value of this? Oh, okay. Yep, this is pulling me into being reactive and leading with fear. I want to pull back and make sure I'm clear on my value of communication here. Um, that's what I would say.
When you, even at the beginning of that, and you describe, not doing this when the house is burning down, that the thought that came to mind is like, yeah, if the boat is sinking, that's not the time to learn how to swim.
Yeah,
Like, like, hopefully we've trained some of those things in advance. And I even remember somebody sharing this. It was actually in a business context. It wasn't even a sport context, but I ended up sharing it often in the sporting realm of, like, are we in the business of teaching people how to swim? Are we teaching them how to not drown? And that distinction being really important. But, like, how many, having a coach, having a second set of eyes, and somebody who can, as you said, provide that ongoing support, accountability, all of that, that's actually where you're going to really teach somebody how to swim, because it's no different than what you're doing with players.
yeah.
And it's now just, it's returning it towards yourself. Where I was thinking, trying to think of where I wanted to go exactly next here, because I had my thought and then I lost it. We'll edit this part out,
Yeah, you're
for sure.
Did you see the Steve Kerr interview when he talks about when he first got the Warriors job and he went and sat with Pete Carroll,
Yeah.
and
Hmm.
Pete was like, "Well, how are you going to coach your team?" And he's like, "Oh, my offense or my defense, whatever." And he's like, "No, no, no. Like, what are your values? What are the foundation that everything's going to filter out of it?" And one of his big ones was joy. And so how he puts action into joy and how he works with the athletes every day. And so this isn't revolutionary, but I do think it's sometimes a skipped step,
Mm.
right? We get pulled into performance, we get pulled into all these different areas, but like, what if we took the time to really set that foundation for ourselves as coaches?
So where I was thinking of going to is like there are going to be different camps of coaches listening to this. No different again from players. When I would, come in, we would do mental performance work. Like you're going to have different camps. You're going to have those that are bought in, that are like living, breathing. They love everything you're describing. You're going to have those that it's not for me for whatever reason, or they feel like they don't need it, or whatever the case might be. And then you get those that are like, I'm listening to Tracy and some of this is resonating, like some of this is starting to, she's describing what I'm feeling or what has gone through my head. And yet I've talked to other coaches who it's like just because maybe what might be helpful for you doesn't always tip the scale to then getting you to act on it. So for coaches that might be listening that are like, what they're describing is what I'm feeling and thinking, and I just don't know if coaching is the right thing for me. What might be either words of encouragement and or suggestions that you would pose to those that maybe might tip them towards, okay, maybe this is something that could really help me?
Just have the conversation, get curious, allow just space to let the walls down for a moment. I know I felt a lot of like I was supposed to have all the answers. I was supposed to already know this stuff because I had the title of coach. And when I pulled back, I was like, I wasn't taught any of this. Like there wasn't any handbook we could read, but like, how can I have somebody that can be with me on the day to day and really understand where I'm coming from? So I just have the conversation. This isn't for everybody, and that's fine. Um, I think some people can do this work naturally, and that's great. I couldn't. I have a coach for myself I work with every other week, who helps me stay grounded to my values, which are right here on my desk. And I can still get pulled into that place of insecurity and scarcity. And so having that person to kind of like, for me, it's a lot of compassion, self-compassion. When I can feel myself going there, I'm like, okay, we need to go back to compassion. So of just getting curious and asking yourself the questions. And I think for me, the impact piece was such a huge pull that, and I don't know why, because it should be enough to make it about myself, but at the time it wasn't. It was like, okay, this is about my team. How much is my
Mm,
team going to benefit if I get more clarity and more self-awareness around who I am as a leader?
mm,
That was my like carrot, was like, oh my gosh, why wouldn't I do this? This is a performance opportunity, right? If I learn more about myself and ultimately I can have a bigger impact on the people I'm coaching, let's go. Let me at least have the conversation.
I shared a message around this a while back with it was adapted from Atul Gawande, who famous surgeon who has written a great book, or has written a few books, but one of which he talks a little bit about how, even as a surgeon, having a coach and the benefit that he received from that. And he was like, I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, but he basically boiled it down to is coaching done well is probably the most effective intervention for enhancing human performance. And yet we know this for athletes, but then as to your point, it's like, hey, I can enhance myself to then also return that to those that I'm leading and those that I'm serving. Like I think certainly for many, that is a really great gateway or entry point into having these conversations and just being, like you said, I think starting with curiosity is that's there's nothing that I don't it's hard to think of negatives that can
Yeah.
come from that. At the very least, maybe you get some awareness.
Well, and we live in this sport, in this place where like I'm coaching people that do this for other people all the time. So having these conversations and being able to hold up a mirror and they're like, oh my God, this is exactly what I would say to an athlete. Why is this so difficult for me? Why is it so difficult for you? right? These aren't foreign concepts. And so when we start to dig into these conversations with coaches, it's like they have it all. They have it all, what they need right at their fingertips. It's like, how can we develop habits, develop systems to support what the best version of you is, so you can show up that way and have a more sustainable relationship with this career.
Hmm. One one last thing I'll add with it is again I think it might have been in the same message. There's a phrase that I've used now. I don't know who the original author of this was, but it has certainly resonated because I think this is what coaches do for players. But how I've sometimes now described my work with coaches is that, you know, you can't read the label from inside the jar.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so like you think about it when you're in the jar as the coach, you're in the pressure, you're dealing with expectations, you're dealing with not just the professional, but also the personal side of it. Like there's things you miss. There's blind spots. There's things that where having a different perspective is so valuable, and yet coaches don't maybe always have that, you know, or they're expected to be the one like, I can't show that I don't have all the answers.
Yeah.
And so I love hearing you in essence describe how that now is in essence central to kind of your work. I want to kind of bring us to the last few questions here. You started with values as far as that foundation, and then you started there to also kind of expand a little bit on continuing to nurture those different systems and habits and patterns and things like that. That's going to help a coach grow. I'm just interested, like, are there any other strategies or tools that you feel like are really practical that if a coach listening to this could be in essence something that one, either they can start to maybe think of and experiment with on their own, and or like this is a great opportunity for you to have a conversation with somebody and
Yeah.
explore it through coaching.
So I created a couple months back in October these leadership labs where I bring these topics into a room, and it's an open lab for coaches of any level, any sport, and we discuss these topics. And our last discussion was on protecting our energy and the the ability to be strategic about that. Right? We ask our athletes, okay, make sure before practice, what are you eating? What are you doing? Are you napping? And then when you look at a coach, it's like, okay, what's the best version of me? What's my peak of the day? Where do I want to be at my best? All right. 9 times out of 10, coaches say I want to be at my best at practice. I want to be most clear-headed. I want to be more present, whatever. Everything that comes across your desk all day long takes little slivers of your energy, emotionally, cognitively, physically, right? So what can you do to protect that part of the day? And be strategic about it. Plan ahead, right? I have coaches I'm working with that part of her strategy is making sure that her fridge in her office is stocked with healthy snacks, right? So that she can make sure she's fueling herself so that she's a better version of herself on deck rather than just grabbing a granola bar on the way out to practice. I have another coach that communicates with everybody that, hey, I have an hour before practice that is a no-fly zone and 20 minutes after for reflection, because that's where I know I need to be most clear-headed and that's where I'm protecting my time. And so of it's not selfish, it's strategic. It's leadership. And I think we if we can plan ahead, we can't always control the schedule, but if we can at one point make time for a better version of ourselves that day and we can coach more clear-headed and feel better about the impact we get to have, I think that's a great opportunity and a great start.
Last couple things from me. You've touched a little bit on your like your family, and I think you know, obviously you describe, you know, the support obviously from your husband and things like that, and I also know that there are certainly unique demands and challenges that can come with also like being a mom and being a coach, right? Something that, you know, that you've not only experienced as a coach itself, but I know like also you had you kind of filled in when you were at UCLA for their coach during maternity leave and so on. So uh, I'm actually just kind of interested for a moment, and this might be probably too broad of a question, but like where you might see systems around coaching unintentionally like making things harder or not sustainable for women in particular, and just kind of maybe how you're also helping um, women coaches kind of navigate some of those added pressures.
Yeah, you are. This could be a totally another podcast.
Yeah.
Um,
I threw this in towards the end, and I'm like, oh, this we could have spent the whole time here, I'm sure. So maybe this will be a part two.
yeah, supporting women in sport and women in coaching. It's funny because I actually just am just going to do a program in March at Berkeley, the program of leadership in women's sports, and just the ecosystem of what's happening in women's sports, and the money that's going into it, people that are investing in it, and how can we really capitalize on this moment. And so I'm going to jump in with a group there to learn and continue to push the envelope there. But what I'm seeing in practice is, and I was intentional about this when I started this. Yes, I am for women and coaches. I was a part of a women's summit where 11 of us got together to support one another, and there is a different experience to be a woman in the industry. um it's undeniable. It's backed by research, from a pay gap to opportunities to the people making decisions um are a lot of times men. And so I was intentional when I went into this work of not making it just for women, because we need allies. And the people that are making the decisions and opening doors and supporting once those doors are open are men in leadership roles. And so if there are men that want to dive into this work, I welcome with open arms. I think everybody, human, does better when they are more aligned with who they are and what they're about and more self-aware. So it's not, my work is not isolated towards women, but ultimately the impact um, hopefully opens more doors just for people to be whole humans in this environment. And I think that's what we all wanted, what we all need. You talked about maternity leave. It's a topic in sport that I think needs more attention. Um, it's wonderful. I'm blanking on her name, but the story last year about the Tennessee women's basketball coach, you know what I mean, having a baby in her first season, and that's wonderful. That's great for her. That's not everybody's opportunity. And yes, we need to share more stories in that. Jordan Wolfram at UCLA, head coach. No one had done this before. We hadn't heard about this. She went to her AD and was like, hey, the best thing that could support me during maternity leave when I need to step away um, is bringing in somebody who can support my staff and support my team. And here's what I want to do. And here's what we're going to pay her. And here's what it's going to look like. Um, and that was a no-brainer to me. And honestly, the courage that it took for her to, one, know what she needed, ask for what she needed, and then good on UCLA administration for stepping up and doing it. Because that hasn't been a model that I've seen. It was not my experience. And not because anyone was telling me no, but nobody knew to ask. So, and that's maternity, paternity leave, just being a human with a family in this industry of sport. And that stretches beyond just coaches. That you talk about athletic trainers and everybody else that is touching these athletes and the experience into high performance. It takes a lot.
At the beginning, we were talking a little bit, and I don't think this is necessarily the exact word you use, but we were talking about like just the synergy that can come with when there's coherence, like personally and professionally, and getting those things, and again, just not making those things completely separate. The reality is they start to bleed to both, and so just being mindful and thoughtful of both for coaches and support in both spaces, to me, I think says it makes a ton of sense. Um, there's a lot I would love to still continue to unpack. I feel like maybe we pin some of it for a part two at some point. But where I would definitely want to maybe put a bow on this conversation is a question that I do like to generally ask all of our guests, which is, Tracy, like what's something that you're proud of that maybe you haven't always gotten an excuse to talk about?
Mm. I am really proud of how I am structuring my life right now. Um, I'm building a business that I'm completely passionate about and is aligned on every aspect with my values, while also still being able to honestly say I'm putting my family first. And that's really, really important to me. When I, was asked that legacy question and what I want my legacy to be, and the people that are most important to me live inside the walls of this home. And so to be able to truly be aligned on both sides, and when 3 o'clock comes, my computer shuts and I am mom. And this afternoon, I'm coaching the fourth grade girls basketball team. Um, and so to get to give back in that way to these people that truly mean the most to me, while still being able to serve a community that I care deeply about. And that balance is something I don't think I did very well the first time around. And I am truly, truly proud to be living that. And yeah, I'm at day to day.
I love that. I think that's a great, it's again, it's a good full circle moment from what you described at the beginning, just kind of what you were experiencing and feeling again as that time, as you reach kind of that tipping point in your traditional kind of sport coaching career, and now how it's come full circle. But also too, again, going back to that, like, hey, you're most powerfully positioned to serve the person you once were. I'm just super appreciative that we have another person out there like yourself who have wrestled with these things, have been, I think there's also just an immense amount of value and perspective you can provide, not only having gone through and felt so many of those things that coaches are now facing, but also to have gotten some help and support and coaching while you were doing it. Like you can also speak to what that was like and how it helped you and how it freed you up and how what were challenges with it? What were, again, it doesn't necessarily that mean that all the work is easy by any means, and so I think the fact that you bring all of that perspective now to those that you're serving and coaching, I think is wonderful. So, and I'm just appreciative you taking some time to peel back some of that curtain, not only for that work now, but also what's led to it along the way. So thank you, Tracy.
Well, and thank you for creating this platform for this and having these more open discussions. We see a lot of it when it comes to athlete performance, right? And those discussions are happening constantly. But what about coaches, high performing coaches, and what do they need to be at their best? And so I appreciate you creating this platform for conversations like this.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I'm appreciative of you again and looking forward to our next conversation. And any last thing I want to make sure I give a plug for, if anybody listening to this has any, like, oh, I kind of am interested or I'd have more questions or things I'd be interested in, where can people find you, Tracy?
I am on LinkedIn. I am on Instagram. I have my website is tracyslusser.com. There's a link for, I love having conversations. I love learning from people. There's always something I can learn from somebody. So if you're curious, just hop on, grab a spot, and let's connect.
Awesome. Awesome. I'll make sure I add those two in the show notes. So for those listening, you can find Tracy and again continue these conversations. But again, Tracy, I just want to thank you again one last time for your thoughts, your reflections, and your insights shared today.
Thanks, Randek. I
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Yeah.